some big news is WWE Hall of Famer. Yes, they put him in the Hall of Fame because he appeared at WrestleMania 3 and WrestleMania 4. That made him more qualified than Sid and Demolition and Ivan Koloff and all these more legitimate Hall of Famers. But Bob Uecker, Mr. Baseball, who's probably best known for the Major League movies, passed away at the age of 91 yesterday. So Triple H called him a WWE legend. So there you go. I'm sorry to hear that, but I do find it sad that we have Drew Carey and Mr. Baseball in the Hall of Fame and not a great guy like Bill Eadie from Demolition. Apparently, for the international feed for SmackDown on Netflix, what they've been showing during the commercial breaks, which, by the way, apparently in US, we get the actual commercials on Netflix, but on international feeds, it just says, "We'll be right back," which is just as bad as a commercial. The son of Scott Steiner and the cousin of Braun Breaker, Brock Rex Steiner, who's a football player now, has been offered an NIL deal by WWE. He's currently playing at Jacksonville State. I did try and watch the Paul Heyman episode of the Impulsive Logan Paul podcast, and I must say I couldn't make it past 5 minutes. It was extremely boring. The most boring wrestler podcast he's done so far. And one thing I'll say, this has nothing to do with why I turned it off. The subjects they were bringing up weren't interesting, but he said he's by far the greatest manager of all time. And Logan Paul's like marking out for Paul Heyman. I guess Logan Paul's too young to remember Bobby Heenan. And I like Logan Paul, but to me, well, you just can't compare Bobby Heenan to Paul Heyman. He's just that much better. Paul Heyman to me is very repetitive and he talks for too long periods of time. And if you watch Paul Heyman take a bump compared to Bobby Heenan, I mean, there's just no comparison who the greatest manager of all time is, in my opinion. Nick Khan, WWE president, has confirmed WWE is doing an event in Paris soon. January 10th, the SmackDown in Portland, Oregon had over 9,000 fans. I'll be heading to Portland next month, where I will be visiting Billy Jack Haynes, who is still incarcerated. So there's something to look forward to. Apparently, Mr. McMahon, according to Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer, he settled his Securities and Exchange Commission issues on January 9th, and this was related to irregularities in the reporting of company public information on expenses and properties. It had to do with details of two legal settlements he had made. One was for $7.5 million, and another was for $3 million, for which only $1 million was paid so far. That was related to Janelle Grant, who didn't get her other $2 million because she talked about the case. And there's an ongoing legal situation in that Grant case, the mysterious woman that only has two pictures in existence of herself for 20 years ago and has hired people that used to represent Barack Obama to represent her for all of her publicity, because she loves publicity, but her case seems to be getting weaker and weaker and weaker as time goes on and more information comes out. Apparently, Kenny Omega's contract may be ending soon in AEW. You can't really say that, I don't know, it wouldn't do him good to switch to WWE at this point. He's done all he can do at AEW. People that didn't know about him in the States, I guess you could say he's become more known overall since joining AEW, but it's not like, he's not, I would say he's fairly stale right now. I know he's been in and out of the hospital, but for instance, he appeared on a New Japan event, the San Jose City Civic Auditorium last weekend, which was a big Battle in the Valley show, and it only had about 1,600 fans. He wasn't the only AEW star on that. By the way, speaking of New Japan, they did do a show the night after Wrestle Kingdom in Japan involving AEW, and they said after that show they're no longer going to do 2 nights in a row. So that shows you how successful that was in Japan. AEW has pulled all Rey Fenix merchandise. I guess this is in response to Penta having a great debut in WWE. He had been in under AEW contract up until December 1st. However, for whatever reason, they didn't use him since July. They like to just not use people whose contracts aren't expiring, that are expiring, even though they pay them. They'd rather than use them to help get other people over or sell merchandise, they'd rather just discontinue the merchandise and have these people sit at home. Somebody made a comment that with Penta's debut for WWE, you'd think that they would want to put Rey Fenix, his former partner, on TV. And they didn't do a good rating at all this week for Dynamite, only about a 0.18, which, consider this, their debut episode was in the 0.6s. So the largest attendance in combat sport for 2024, the largest one was 96,000, DAZN, London, England, Wembley Stadium for Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois. The second highest combat sports attendance, 59,666. Arlington, Texas, AT&T Stadium, Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul. WWE WrestleMania Philadelphia, Night 2, which The Rock was on that card. 56,758 at Lincoln Financial Field. Then the UFC's biggest card was UFC Mexico City, February 24th, 21,546. CDMX Arena for Brandon Roval versus Brandon Moreno. They don't. I haven't even heard these names before, and I know obviously that's the biggest crowd in UFC. It just seems to me like they've got John Jones. They may or may not use Conor McGregor again, but it seems to me like the days where you knew like all the top MMA fighters in UFC are gone. It's not 2008 anymore. It seems to me that like the fighters are less known overall for whatever reason. AEW's biggest crowd was 53,000, including comps at Wembley Stadium. August 25th for their All In, which they're not doing it again in England this year, which was a considerable drop from the attendance last year. They actually have several tapings coming up with only around 1,000 or less tickets, according to the Wrestling Observer. By the way, I did an interview with Lance Von Erich the other day, and I got to spend the day with him. And it was very good. He's one of the nicest wrestlers I've dealt with. I'm gonna do a UFO news update right after this for all the UFO people making comments. I was also supposed to interview Greg Valentine in Vegas, and his wife wouldn't let him do the interview due to reasons I won't discuss public, but we'll get Valentine another time. So I'll get back to you guys in a bit with UFO news update. Sam, I actually found Captain Lou Albano more entertaining than Paul Heyman too. Paul Heyman's most entertaining time as a manager to me was when he was with Dangerous Alliance in WCW. He's too long-winded and repetitive now, to be honest. Brock Lesnar may have been the best guy he ever managed, and that was a good pairing. But at this point, I no longer find it's like we all know he's going to do the same "My name is Paul Heyman" stuff that we've seen a million times. Bobby Heenan mixed it up, and it was more about the wrestlers and getting himself over. And he took better bumps and he was just more entertaining in general. I never liked Paul Heyman as an announcer either. And I'm not taking away from him. Overall, I like him and respect him, but I wouldn't put him up there as the greatest manager of all time. One of the greatest workers and old school Carney style workers of all time for sure. And that's not an insult, but he's definitely a great